The real cost of cheap VCI. Meet Rusty. The company that he works for makes metal parts. Every year it's the same thing. Rusty's company is always trying to find new ways to save money. And this year, Rusty had the idea of saving money on his rust-preventative vapor corrosion inhibitors. Rusty figured that they manufacture 30,000 parts per week at a cost of $1 per part for a total of $30,000 worth of parts. For years, Rusty's company has relied on Armor Protective Packaging's VCI, that's vapor corrosion inhibitors, to protect their parts from rust. Armor recommended the following for packaging their parts. For every 100 parts packaged, there's one Armor Poly VCI bag priced at $4.20 and one sheet of Armor Wrap paper at $1 per sheet, which brings the total piece priced to .052 cents each. Using Armor's recommendation as a guide, Rusty decides to look into cheaper VCI. So he went online, did a little research, and found that he could save around 7 to 10%, or $8,112 initially. So Rusty decides to go with the cheap VCI to save the company some money. What Rusty doesn't know are the cold hard facts on VCI. Fact: not all VCI is the same. Fact: many VCI products don't work well. Fact: some work well in direct contact with metal, but not in a vapor phase. Fact: most applications require both direct contact and vapor phase. Fact: if you think you're saving 10% on a low-priced VCI product but have a rust issue, think again. But unfortunately, Rusty doesn't know this information. He walks into his boss's office to deliver the good news on all the money that'll save because of his cheap VCI solution. And they all live happily ever after. Right? Wrong. Now let's pause it, fast forward a few months into the future, and watch the true cost of cheap VCI add up. A few months later, an angry phone call comes into the customer service department, complaining about rust on their parts. The customer service department calls the sales manager. Then the sales manager calls Rusty. The entire communication of the rust complaint costs around $48, assuming an hourly burden rate of $24 for 2 hours. Now, an 8D meeting needs to be arranged to discuss the complaints and figure out a solution. These meetings usually consist of the quality manager, engineering, production, packaging engineer, and customer service. Let's assume an average salary and burden rate of $45 per hour times 5 hours for a total of $450. Now the cost of rust is up to $498. During this time, the Rusty parts are being shipped back to Rusty's company. That's another $818, which includes transportation and shipping/receiving personnel costs. Now our total cost of rust is up to $1,316. Once the Rusty parts are returned, they have to be inspected. So let's assume 2 people will do this at a $22 hourly rate plus burden for 2 hours. This totals $88. Do you see a pattern here? The cost of rust is now $1,404. And we're not done. Once the parts have been inspected, another 8D meeting is held. Yep, you guessed it, consisting of a quality manager, engineering, production, packaging engineer, and customer service. So now the total cost of rust is $1,854. During the meeting, it was decided that it'd be better to rework the Rusty parts rather than scrapping them. Assuming a 75% rejection rate, to scrap the parts would be $24,000. To rework each part would cost $7,500, assuming it would take 1 minute per part for a total of 375 man hours. Our cost to rust total now, $9,354. Now that the parts are cleaned, they have to be delivered back to the customer. Yep, another $818 for delivery, and again, including those transportation and shipping/receiving personnel costs, which brings the total cost to rust up to $10,172. And of course, during this whole time, there's been constant communication with the customer. We can assume an average salary and burden rate of $50 per hour times 8 hours for $400. Keep in mind that the salary cost is not taking into account the loss of new business because of all the time and resources spent on this complaint. Rusty now has to go back to his boss to deliver the bad news. So what did Rusty learn? Armor products cost $81,120. Cheap VCI cost $73,008. Or did it? The perceived savings were $8,112, 7 to 10%. but we know now the actual cost of rust was $10,572. And this is only for one incident. Maybe it's 1 out of 52 shipments for the year. But what if this happens 2, 3, 4, or 5 times a year? It gets worse. That number doesn't include opportunity cost, scrap cost, or reputation cost, which in the end, cost the most. Don't take a risk on rust. It's easier to explain price once than apologize for quality forever. Make the right decision and protect your parts and your reputation with Armor Protective Packaging.